Welcome back. It is the Rhetoric Warriors podcast. Once again, we're cleaning up public discourse, just like pulling all the plastic bottles of ugliness out of the waters of language. I don't know. I'm Dr. Dan French, rhetorician, PhD in rhetoric, late night comedy writer, founder of Rhetoric Warriors. The podcast does three things: talk to comedians and comedy pros about their careers and then their politics. Super fun. I convert conservatives on here because the right worries me and it's fun to talk to them. And I bring on persuasion pros and rhetoricians to teach you some things about how to actually use rhetoric in the world. The podcast has more rhetoricians than any other podcast in the world. That's my claim. This is another episode of Comedy Pros, which super fun. I've been having a lot of fun with this, pulling in my old connections to talk to some really great comics and writers and producers about the biz of putting together these particular types of messages. And my guest today, I've known off and on for a long time. I wonder if he remembers when we first met, but he's went from Boston comic, I think is what I remember, to a Hollywood showrunner, been involved with multiple shows, is still out there doing it, still living in the fine city of Sherman Oaks, California. So welcome, Chris McGuire.
Thanks, Dr. Dan.
Dr. Dan.
Hey, I'm trying to remember when it was we met. I think was it at Charlie Goodnight's? No,
that's the right city.
Right. Oh, it was in Charlotte?
No, Raleigh.
Raleigh. Oh, it was in Raleigh. Oh, I forget the name of the club then, but I remember. Yeah, right.
There was a little restaurant. I don't remember who the booker was, but he was a professional booker. But somehow he got to where he was running this little room at the back of a restaurant called Duffy's. And it was seated about 100 people. And it was a perfect comedy room, absolutely perfect. And he brought a bunch of guys in from Boston and New York. Like I got double booked once with, what's his face? Big time dude now. Always upset. Louis Black.
Oh, Louis Black. Sure.
Yeah, we both showed up to headline. I lived in Raleigh. So I'm like, dude, you do it. It's fine. But we met at Duffy's.
Was it a weekday gig? Like, was it before? Was I doing Charlie Goodnights and I just came in like the night before and did Duffy's?
I don't think so. It was a weekend gig.
Yeah.
And you came in and did it. And I think I featured for you. And I think it only lasted about a year.
Oh, okay.
But it was super fun after the show, here's what I remember. I came off the stage and you were like, hey man, how's that thinking man stuff do in the South?
Did I say that?
You did. That's an exact.
I remember you were pulling out some biblical stuff. You're doing the Daniel and the Lion's Den thing.
Oh yeah. I had all sorts of weird references in there. What I remember from your act, and I learned something like as a writer from you that day. Like I hadn't really hung around with a lot of hardcore East Coast dudes and the way they wrote. And you did a line about Moses flossing his ass at the gym. And I'm like, what a great image. A great collision of words. I was like, I'm going to write some shit like that.
I should have, I think I just should have followed your path on that. I think, I don't think that gem never ended up on late night.
It was great line. So you were a Boston comic. Is that where you started?
I did. I grew up in New York and Long Island. And I went to college in Maine and I ended up in Boston and had a regular job for a while and then started doing stand-up. Yeah, in the very early 90s. So it was a good. I always say like I started like the day after the peak of Boston comedy, or maybe comedy in general, but definitely Boston comedy.
Yeah.
It was honestly like a hangover. It felt like a hangover from like a really great party. That's what it felt like when I started there.
Yeah, I could see that. Like one of my first paid gigs was at Lexington on Broadway in Kentucky, and Kenny Rogerson was the headliner. And
so funny.
He was great. Oh my God. I was like, oh,
so
this is
funny.
how you're supposed to do this.
Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. But he also drank himself into a stupor and passed out on stage.
Oh no.
But I'm like, hey, this looks like a fun industry. I could do this.
Yeah. He used to stay with me after he moved out of Boston, he'd stay with me and my roommate. And he really was like his mind never stopped. Like that's why you would just be on or off. And he'd be up late and just get bored and then just relabel all our VHS tapes with like really funny shit that you find like months later. You're like, oh, what's Uncle Timmy's fuck barn? You know, it's like literally over Seinfeld episodes, you know?
Yeah, I mean, guys like that, you know, like that's what I kind of miss about the real hardcore days of stand-up was just the characters. They
Yeah.
were born for stuff like this. Like if there was no stand-up comedy, it would have been the, you know, the Village Idiot or whatever. But it's just amazing the way their minds work and they just never stop. And
Yeah, no, and then in Boston they had like, I mean, I don't know if every city has it, but I know New York did for sure. But like, just like group housing, you know what I mean? Like they'd have like, there was one place in Cambridge, Mass, East Cambridge, Mass, called the Barracks, which were like Kenny Rogerson lived there, Kevin Meaney, I think Lenny Clark might have lived there. You know, there was like a bunch of them like in and out. And in New York, there were always those, you know, apartments that are like rotating,
right.
You know, people from out of town and stuff, or people living there but spending most of their time on the road. In LA, there was a hotel. All the Boston comics who came out here to, you know, try and crack it. It was on North Argyle. They called it the Hack Hotel. It was like 6 comics. It was, I think Bill Burr might have lived there for a minute. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's ever really captured, you know, that the essence of the comedy scene, like the stand-up scene, you know, the real community of what it was like and stuff like that. You hear people every once in a while telling road stories, but it doesn't really get at the community itself, you know, just being a part of that.
No, the road story is the community is the Avengers story. You know what I mean? Like when everybody's in town at the bar or whatever, waiting to go on, you know, it showcases. And then the other stuff are the standalone, like the road stories are standalone movies.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I would think Lenny Clark was Hulk. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe
yeah.
Yeah. So you were Boston for a couple years?
I was there for 8 years. I probably should have left after 5. But it was such, you know, it was a hard nut. That city was a hard nut to crack as a comic, that once, like it took me about 5 years to be like, I'm working, you know, at all the clubs I want to work at. It's like good work. I don't have to be I could sleep in my own bed most nights, and I don't, you know, I'm not doing as many junk gigs and stuff like that. So I was like, you know, I worked my ass off for this for 5 years, so I'm going to enjoy this for a little while. And so I probably should have left sooner than I did, but I hung around for a little while longer.
So did you move to New York or to LA first?
I did in 97, I did the San Francisco comedy competition. And that, you know, so I, you know, met a lot of people doing that. And then, you know, there were people there who were like, you know, there's a lot of West Coast work. If you're on the, you know, West Coast, let us know or whatever. And so that kind of started me thinking like, maybe it's time to like make a move. So I didn't go to New York, even though I grew up there. I went to, I moved to LA.
Straight to LA, Boston to LA.
Boston to LA. It was a, you know, that it's a tough move. I mean, you did it, you know what it's like.
Well, I moved from Kentucky to LA, so
yeah,
that's easier.
Maybe
that's a move up.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I mean, at the time, you know, again, I feel like when I don't know, when did you move to LA? I moved in 98.
99.
99. Okay. So we were basically there around the same time, meaning like it's also like the day after the sitcom boom. You know what I mean? Like at some level, like I remember people talking about like, oh, when you go to the Improv, there's always people like running around with clipboards and taking down your name after you get off stage. It's like, I maybe saw that once, maybe. And
yeah, that was right after the Tim Allen deal, like all that stuff that blew up in stand-ups, you know.
I think it might have been
Raymond.
like Ellen had one. I think Kevin James got one of the last ones. You know, there were a few, Chelsea Handler, you know, some people like that. But the day of the, you know, the age of the writing a big check thing was kind of on its way out for sure.
So you're attracted to places that boom, and then you come in on the echo.
I like to show up at parties when they're like winding down. Maybe I'll start a podcast.
Oh my God. Yeah, there's so much money in podcasts. It's such an art form. It has grown up a little bit, thank God. Like I remember the first days of this stuff, but at least people are producing them a little bit now. So
yeah.
So you got to LA, and what was your path there?
At LA, well, it was rough for about. I kind of ate shit for about 5 years. I did the road for the first couple of years. I did the road probably half the year. I would say I was probably out of town 26 plus weeks a year, and you know, that just to pay the bills. And then I kind of figured out like, well, I'm just going to be doing this forever unless I like, you know, stick around. You know, I got like I was in kind of a weird boiler room situation for a while with some comedians that there was a guy who came to town and he had some money from some outside investors and he wanted to start like a writer's room and pitch scripts and stuff like that. So I did that for about 9 months. And so that kept me in town, which was great. And actually it was like, nobody really knew what they were doing. And literally we just would have like a copy of Sid Field on the table. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe let's just crack this open, figure out how to write a script, you know?
The magic.
And I did. So I learned how to write. Yeah, I learned how to write like features there and sitcoms and stuff like that.
Yeah,
you know?
That's so funny though. Like the magic, I see this a lot because I've taught screenwriting at Cal State for a few years, and I've judged the Austin Film Festival, finalist a lot, and I've seen this where people try to learn the craft as they do their first thing, and I'm like, yeah, because it's so simplistic. Like writing a movie is so simple. Everybody's watched so many movies, they don't understand like how much is actually in there.
Oh God, yeah.
It's fascinating to watch when they give you something and you're like, yeah, this is like a 90th% done.
Yeah, it's interesting when, and the appreciation and like, obviously during the pandemic, well, I'm watching a lot of old stuff, and sometimes you watch something from the 80s or the 70s and the pacing's real off, and you're like, this isn't, it still might be a good movie, but like, it doesn't feel very modern. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And absolutely. Then the other night I was watching Midnight Run, and that movie's about 30 minutes too long, but the beginning of it's like the first 8 minutes, a lot happens, like, it's like, oh, I was like, this is a tight script that they just kind of, it was like planes, trains, automobiles. And then they had like helicopters, hitchhiking, more trains, you know what I mean? Like they had too many parts to the trip, but it's a fun movie. And when you see like a first act clip along like that in the 80s, you're like, oh, this is pretty modern way to do this,
Yeah, they were pretty drifty in their second act in the 80s.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, we got everybody hooked. Let's just wander.
Well, I've heard on some, whatever, I listen to screenwriting podcasts and stuff like that. And, they say that like basically all it takes to, sell a great script is like that killer opening 15 minutes and the closing 15 minutes, and everything in the middle, they have faith that they'll figure it out,
Yeah, that's you bang into a story and you bang out of a story. So
yeah,
that makes sense. Like,
yeah, that's a stand-up.
That's right. You do your second best bit, your best bit to open and close. And there you
that's
go.
Right.
It's all the same psychology. Okay, so you're out there, you're doing the boiler room. I think that's kind of an interesting entree in some ways.
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, it was a bunch of guys I'm still friends with and stuff like that. But it literally ended like, this as a comic, like when the checks are late or they stop coming all of a sudden, you're like, okay, this is done. Yeah. This room is done. It's going over, and all they're doing is talking me into coming back the next time because they know I did it without a check the last time, and
Right.
just waving like,
How
sure,
long
the
can we
check's
keep
coming.
this going? Yeah.
Yeah. So one day we went in and and literally the phones were on the floor, all the furniture was gone, like the whole deal. It was amazing.
I've had that
But I
experience.
got
Have you had that experience of walking into a club that you've been booked and they didn't tell you that they closed?
no, I don't think I've ever had that.
Yeah,
But I
there's a
had.
club. There's a club in North Carolina. I drove. It was only like 4 hour drive, but I got there and
Oh.
I'm like, this doesn't look right. This is not. There's nothing in the parking lot. I walked in. There's one dude behind the bar just kind of cleaning something, and he's like, "We closed." I'm like, "I'm the comic." He goes, "Sorry, I forgot to call you."
Yeah. Oh yeah. You're like very low down on the call sheet,
Yeah,
like for those businesses. I did. I remember. Do you remember the comedian Bob Marley? Did you meet him when he was out here?
I know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like the king of Maine, and I think this was his. If this wasn't his gig, he's told me this is a good gig or whatever or something. I forget. But he was a friend of mine from Boston. So I always say like with a room, with a gig, there's like 10 things that can go wrong, right? There's like a drunk audience, there's the TVs are on, there's no stage, there's bad lighting, there's sound system's not working, some really bad opening act that just destroys the room in a bad way. There's so many
Right.
things now. And I say if 3 or 4 of them happen, it's a hell gig. So 3 or 4 on that list of 10 happen, you're in for that's a definition of a hell gig. So this gig I did in Old Orchard Beach, Maine, I wish that they had canceled, had like all 10 plus one I had never thought about. It was a bar on the water, no stage, pool tables in front of where the people were sitting, people talking, hecklers, all this stuff. Plus, I'm standing in front of a window, and it's like they had the kind of an amusement park outside, and they had this thing called the swinging pirate ship ride, which was like a giant pendulum with people in it going like this, right? Only here, imagine here's the wall and the windows, and I'm standing right here, and this thing is going like this, like within about 5 feet of me or something. So it's I think we're gonna die, and B, like it's an enormous distraction. So yeah, and that one, yeah, that was a cash gig and I got paid. But that one always comes to mind when people talk about like you drive someplace and like the gig's gone.
I'm going to give you another scenario because I have 2 stories about you that I tell, just sort of pull them up every once in a while. One was Moses flossing his ass because that was a transformative moment for me as a comedian. And the other one was talk about hell gigs. Like I use you as a story of here's the worst like overcome like thing that you could never overcome during a comedy show that I saw happen to a buddy of mine. Like this is the worst. Like there's no way that whatever you say is going to be more dominant than the other thing in the room.
Oh no.
Do you remember what this is? Can you?
No, I don't. What was it?
It was at the Westwood Brewery, I think, is brewing company in around UCLA.
Yes. Yep. Westwood Brew Co. Yep.
Yeah. And
what did I do? What happened?
You had just gone up, and they brought a guy in, a patron. He's by himself, and they sat him at a table like right next to you on the stage, so the whole room could see it. And he had 2 missing arms from the shoulders out.
Yeah, I remember this.
But he had like straws, like that he could manipulate as like arms, like rods.
Oh, yeah.
Not even like arms.
Oh my God.
So, and they served him food.
Yes.
So everybody was watching that guy while you were doing stand-up, and you just barreled through. You didn't give a shit.
I don't think I probably didn't reference him because every time like in the past I've done that where I was at like, oh God, this is how long ago. It was like a Howard Johnson's. It was like a hell gig at a Howard Johnson's. They used to do this bit, and it is true. It would say like on the outside, it said clam rolls and comedy, $9.95. That was like, it was part of the special. And so I went in this one time, and and I was doing okay. And this guy, I think oh man, I think it was the same gig, but it might have been two different gigs at this place. One time, I said something to a guy like, oh, what do you do for a living? Something, whatever it was, something like that. And the guy didn't respond. And I go, what do I have to do? Do I have to move the speaker next to your head? And the guy goes, oh no, I'm sorry. No, he said, I can't hear you. And I go, oh, what do I need to move the speaker next to your head? And he goes, no, I'm like deaf, like whatever. And I'm like, oh, fuck. And then another time I had this bit about being in a car accident or something. And it was just one of those things. And this gig wasn't going great. And I was like, hey, has anyone been in a car accident or whatever it was? And some guy raises his hand and I go, oh, how long ago? And the guy literally starts like, he can't talk. He's like, he can't. And I'm like, oh no. And I literally was like, yeah, mine was 2 years ago. Anyway. So that probably scarred me to the point where I wasn't even going to reference the guy with no arms. Oh
That's
my
funny.
God.
So many beautiful moments in a stand-up career.
Oh boy.
All right, so you're in LA. You're doing the road, but then you move back. You're like, I got to do this thing. I got to concentrate on LA.
Mm-hmm.
What was your first gig?
The first, well, after the Boiler Room, it probably was the Man Show.
Yeah, I kind of remember that. I remember hearing that you had gotten the Man Show, and I was like, oh, great, that's a perfect match.
Yeah, I was probably on my way out of town. I think like I moved to town with some savings, and I think at that point it was pretty close to gone. And so I did that, and I was friends with Joe Rogan at the time. I was opening for him. I think by the time we got to the Man Show, I wasn't opening for him anymore because I think once I did the Boiler Room, I wasn't available as much, and so he started bringing some other guys with him. But I got the meeting through him, and didn't have a lot of time to put together stuff to talk about in the meeting. I didn't submit, so I normally, I'm assuming your audience knows this or not, whatever, sometimes you have to put together a package or a submission package. This one was like straight to meeting, but like it was like, can you do the meeting like at 2:00? And it was like 12:30 or something. So like I literally just was writing down ideas from that moment until like I walked in the door. Like I was like in my car, like stopped at stop signs and then literally pulling out stuff just so I walked in with this piece of paper that said writing like all over it and stuff. And it went well. I think Doug liked my stuff better than anybody else, but
you and Doug would be simpatico, I would think.
I love working with him. He was super fun. He was a lot of fun. He was like had a lot of really, really great ideas.
Yeah, he's the real deal. I like him a lot. I think I wish more people like nationally knew him. I wish there was something about him. Maybe, I don't know if it was that Hicks got, so there's something softer about Hicks or something that people got that he could kind of tease up towards the national level. But Stanhope, man, like there's no mistaking what Stanhope is.
No, but he's kind of got like a pretty big following. It's just not traditional the way shit is now. So it's not like he doesn't have a million Twitter followers, but like everywhere that guy goes is a room full of people. I mean, I saw him when he came to LA years ago, and he just did some bar on Hollywood Boulevard, but it was a club, you know what I mean? But there were no seats. It was just a bunch of people standing like a rock and roll show,
Yeah, I totally admire the way he's carved out a particularly unique career, in stand-up in that way. But he's talented enough that he should be on the national forum.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. He was fun. I mean, like of all the people I've worked with, he really had sharp idea. He knew what a good idea was, and he had a really like his own deep basket of like really fun, good ideas. Because I mean, sometimes people have ideas and you're like, I don't know what we're going to do with that, but you got to figure something out. But his were always like kind of
like, I'd love to do that.
They were always baked. They were always like, oh, that's that's a hidden camera bit. That's a this bit or whatever. And yeah, he was super fun.
That was a really interesting for me. Like when I watched the transition from Kimmel and Corolla over to Rogan and Stanhope, I'm like, I'm not sure those are the same shows. Like, I was like, I
No,
wonder
they
what
weren't.
executive thought, oh yeah, we can slide these two guys into this idiom that these two have created and just keep it going. Like
No, it
I would
was
totally watch a Rogan Stanhope show, but it wasn't the man show.
no. I agree. I mean, we did some really funny stuff, but like it wasn't the man show. Whereas like Kimmel, and whether you like the show or not, right? Like Kimmel and Corolla, like every week that it used to air, I think on Sundays, and it was like it was, again, for better or for worse, it was a bear hug. You know what I mean? And it's hey, you're gonna have a beer, and these guys are your friends, and it's like male energy and stuff, and and with Joe and Doug, I think they hated the audience. I just think they hated the audience. And they thought all that was bullshit. They weren't those kinds of guys.
Yeah, it's just a different type of comics.
So it was more, it became more pranky, it became a lot more pranky. We did a lot of like prank things, and not even hidden camera. We just play it like live. Like it was almost like we had some bits that were like Mad Libs where, and this is my first job. So my first real television job, where like we would write something that would be very embarrassing and very like we would do a bit like he's a psychic, he can help you move on, you can help you after others have moved on to other relationships. So it was basically like a psychic for your ex-girlfriend.
Sure.
I don't know what you're doing. So funny idea. And then so basically the writers would write like, and these were like mean and funny and humiliating, but they were like Mad Libs. So they literally would write the thing that Joe would say, like his vision of what your ex-girlfriend was doing. And then everything else was just the Mad Lib. So you go out to the line to a real guy and go, hey, has anybody just broken up with their girlfriend or whatever? I have. Okay. Oh, what was her name? What's your name? What do you do? Did you have did you leave any clothes at her place? You know what I mean? Like and it was just a Mad Lib. And then it all got plugged in the prompter. And then it would play out like a bad daytime segment, but hilarious. And it was just like the guy would just get pummeled. Yeah. And of course that crowd loved it because they're monsters. And it was really like, it was quite funny, at the time. Now not so. Now it's a different time.
Well, and that was the early, like, when you described it there with the word monster, it's kind of monster comedy, right? It's like you said, they're horrible audience members, they're beasts on stage.
They used to give them beer. You know what I mean? So they were intoxicated. It was a crazy show, but I actually learned a lot. And the head writer had come from SNL and basically was like, and I know so many writers that never benefited from this, where they were like, he would go, you're in charge of everything. So this is your idea, or I'm going to give you an idea. And soup to nuts, this is your idea. So you go out on the field, you do the casting, you work with the director, you to make sure that you come back with what it is that you're pitching. You sit with the editors, you work the editors, and then you show it to me. And then we'll do notes, blah, 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 and that's it. And that was like an amazing, I know great. That was an amazing experience because I know a lot of late night writers who never got out of their desks. You know?
When we were Best Damn Sports, we did a cold open every day. So same thing, you got a pitch and they liked your pitch, and well, here's a producer, here's your go, come back. And that was like, come back from 5 hours and this thing better be done.
Yeah.
But, you need that experience.
It's really good. I mean, and I think that's the SNL thing, which clearly they do every week. And I'm sure there are other late night shows where it works like that. But, like late night has become, a little, everybody's kind of special. Like you're a monologue guy. You're the guy that does bits. You're the person that does this, that, the other thing. And it's not, people get very good at like get very good at one thing, not everybody, but You can just kind of skate through and just be good at one thing. So for me, that was really valuable.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. So you were at the Man Show. Was it Mencia after that?
Yes, I did. I did 4 years at the Mind of Mencia.
Yeah, that was Oshak. He was there for a while, right?
Yeah, I was. We had a great, I mean, these are all people I'm still friends with, but like a great crew of people. Yeah, a great group of people.
Did you end up running that show?
No, but I was a head writer / EP for the last season with Mike Gibbons, who you probably know.
Yeah, I didn't know Gibbons went through Mencia.
He was in the last year, and he and I were like co-head writers.
Okay.
We were EPs, co-head writers and stuff. So yeah, that was my first sort of real like head writer experience. So the showrunner was Robert Morton from David Letterman.
Yeah.
And he was working on some other things some other shows. He had a couple of other shows going on. So there were a bunch of EPs that, we had the person that dealt with most of the field stuff and the person that was the kind of finance person and all that. And, I was the sort of creative guy, but it did get to a certain point where Morty would come in and, what are we doing this week? Like he'd come in and look at my board was more updated,
right.
Yeah.
If I remember, maybe it was, I don't know because I've known Oshak forever. We worked together at Best Damn and then again at Dennis Miller. And I would track some of his jobs through there. And I don't remember if it was Mencia or Spade where he's like, yeah, this is just like comedy plantation. Like they're just whipping us. We're here, till 1 o'clock in the morning. And,
the hours were, I don't remember the hours being as bad as some of the other people do. There are people that like, oh my God, we worked so many hours. And like, I worked on shows after that where the hours were a lot harder. So I never look back at that one. And that's not the first thing I think.
Okay.
That's not the first thing I think. But there were a couple of really late nights. But I did a show a few years ago where I worked like literally 20-hour days. So
So what'd you learn?
It was hard. It was a lot of work.
What did you learn from Mencia? What were your lessons there?
The big lesson I learned there was I learned a bunch of lessons from Robert Morton, from Morty. Like a lot of them are real basic stuff, but people can forget about them because like networks hire somebody and then they kind of forget why they hired them, or they think, why aren't you like this person? Things like that. So for me, it was learning about like, okay, who's this guy? What does he talk about? Where does he feel comfortable? And I use this with every job I've had since then. I was sitting I shared an office with Jeff Schimmel, who is the late Robert Schimmel's brother. And he and I just one day we were like, how many things do you think Carlos talks about in his act? Because we had seen, obviously hours and hours of material. And we had like this contest where it's like, okay, write down all the things that he talks about, and then let's see who's closest to it, whatever. And so we sat down, we did this, and then I think I might have said 9 and he might have said 8. So then I go, what, this is actually kind of valuable. So we put each thing on, like sure. Latino, hip hop, this, that, whatever. Like he had all this thing, freedom of speech, yada, yada. He had all the things that he liked to talk about. We put them up on our wall. And then every time the writers would complain about how their stuff like wasn't getting on or whatever, or we were having problems getting a pitch through or something, I would just point to the wall and I'd say, pitch 80% in there and 20% out of there, because you always want to grow it. But at the end of the day, it's like 80, this is what this host feels comfortable doing, So let's not try. And Morty said that, I remember where he pointed to him at one point. He said, I don't know if he can act. I don't know if he can do this. I know he can tell jokes and I know he can like react, and that's what we should be doing with him. And so that's what I learned. And I use that I do the cards whenever I'm working with a comic, I'll I'll do the cards because it helps me focus on what it is they're comfortable doing.
Yeah, I think that's that's one of the reasons why guys move up to head writer and exec producer and stuff, because they can intellectualize the landscape of what's going on. Like, it's not just generating comedy. Coming from academics first, after 20 years as a professor, the first thing you do in grad school is split everything to its pieces so that you can handle it, because it's too overwhelming if you
Too
don't.
much.
And so, having that localized down to, and I do that with my act and my writing and everything else, so that you can actually handle it intellectually without your brain exploding. And I think that's stuff like that, when you find those little sort of macro techniques that you're just going to use everywhere that carry you through, those are super important.
Yeah, I think in general, like it's really basic. It's like if your host, because I do most of the work I do is with like stand-up comedians, and it's like if your host is comfortable, they're going to do the best job they could do. Like, it's hard, there's a lot of pressure, so you might as well make it easy for them by letting them play in an area that they feel comfortable with. And I've made the mistake on a personal level of just like having a fleeting interest in something, to be like, oh, there could be something there, and then the next thing you know, I spent 4 days like researching, and I'll never be an expert in 4 days.
Right.
So if you're an expert at your 9 things or whatever that are on your cards, I think that is a great way to spend 80% of your time.
Yeah, no, I like it. There's a life philosophy, life approach by Chris McGuire. Find your cards. I see a book. I see a self-help book. What are your 8 cards?
I don't that you know what? That's a good idea. I should do that. And then now I'll go into a self-help research click hole and not ever get anything done.
I can't help it. I've always gone into research holes like that. I recently got hooked on, I wrote a book recently, like a much more academic book. And the original title was Invincible Talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I got interested in the word invincible. So I'm like, what are the invincible things in the world? And Titanic came up instantly, because I'm like, well, one thing you don't want to do is claim to be invincible when you aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And I got interested in the Titanic, and I spent about 2 weeks. I know a shit ton about the Titanic, and it's fun to turn it into a one-person show, at least in theory, because there's so much humor, when you actually know that much detail about something.
Right.
Like, guess how many Adolfs died on the Titanic?
Oh, wow.
It was 1915.
4?
So 4. You got it. You fucking
Did I really?
nailed it. Yeah. No,
I have that. I know I have all the census data on babies' names, male babies' names from the turn of the century.
But like that, it wasn't until like that was a very popular name. That was one of the most common male names that died on the Titanic was Adolf.
Yeah.
But,
wow, that's crazy.
It's pre-1944 or whatever. So
those little things are. I love things like that because it's always a fun answer, and I always feel like things like that are great premises for like stand-up comedy. Gary Goldman. Gary Goldman's got that great bit about the naming the states abbreviations, which is just such a small, specific thing that he made into this very funny 5-minute bit.
Yeah, find that little niche of something that everybody knows, but they don't really know.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the underlying concept of that whole one-person show thing. Is I have comedy OCD. So when I find something that seems funny about this big topic, I have to learn the whole topic so I can turn it all into comedy.
Right.
The most recent one is Titanic. So get ready, because I'm going to talk for an hour about the Titanic.
Right.
And there's 1,500 people who died. And I went through the whole register of all the names on it, and all the ethnicities and the women versus men. Like 75% of women survived that thing.
Really?
Yeah. 95% of women in first class. Because that's, that's what you learn, is save your first class women.
Wow. That's hilarious. I mean, it's not, it is. It's hilarious. It's darkly hilarious. But
it's 100 years. I mean, what are you going to do? It's, come on.
Fucking life, man. Like, first class is, that's, get them to the boats. They're paying for these things.
All right. So 8 cards. I like it. 8 cards by Chris.
8 or 9 cards. Yeah. If you get 8 or 9 is good. 8 or 9 is good. Sometimes I'll work with somebody and I'm like, okay, I could see 4. So I don't know. That's a lot less. And that's when you with people, you just feel one note, you know what that's like. You know what that's in comedy.
Yeah, for sure.
Those kind of
So
gags.
after Mencia, where'd you go?
George Lopez, I think. Yeah.
It was Gibbons
George
again, right? Wasn't Gibbons there?
No, yes, he was. Absolutely. Yes, he was. He
And Sklar was there for a little while.
Chuck Sklar was there. Chuck was there in the second season. I started it was called Lopez Tonight. It was, TBS's first talk show. Was before Conan. Mike Gibbons was there. Lance Crother was the head writer. He was on the Chris Rock show. You might know him as Pootie Tang. And then there weren't that many writers in the first season. There were like maybe 6, 7 of us. It was pretty tight. And then they brought on a bunch of people in the second season, and Chuck Sklar, Tom Agna, all those guys. They were, it was a really great group of people. It was fun. That was a good show. That was a lot of work. Like, talking about hours, it was like, pretty much we'd get in around, it was like 8 to 8 or 9 to 9. Because it was starting up, and that was tougher for me than like the odd every now and then you're working till 2 a.m. because
right.
It's a grind,
Yeah.
But it really, that show looks pretty great in the rearview mirror, in that big fun set, like great.
Yeah, it was huge set.
The audience was huge. It was like 500 people in the audience. The guests were terrific, particularly the first season. They were like, it was everybody. We had like people that normally don't even do late night, just from George's golf contacts.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had Clint Eastwood and Larry David, who never does those shows and stuff like that. And it was really it was a cool experience. You've worked in late night. It's fun. It's fun. Yeah, and it's fun when something big happens.
Yeah. Like, I remember one of my favorite stories of working at the Late Late Show is you had to go past the dressing rooms for the guests to get to the set. And I was walking down the hallway by myself, coming late or something. And I came around the corner and looked in one of the dressing rooms, and it was Mary Tyler Moore, and her door was kind of half open and she was buttoning her pants.
Yeah.
And we made eye contact. And I'm like, hey, Mary Tyler Moore just saw me button her pants. Look at that.
That's amazing. I had, when I was at Arsenio, which was the talk show I did after that, I got to produce Prince. And Prince had done George Lopez's show too, which was also a big deal. Because he also doesn't do that often, and he's also the type of guy, like, if he's doing your show, he's literally taking over your show for that episode is the Prince show, and you're going to do 4 musical numbers, a couple of interview segments, and he's going to want to come in the day before and rehearse, and he's going to want to do post. You know what I mean? Like, he did all of it. And so like that, yeah, producing Prince was one of the coolest things ever. Running into Giancarlo Esposito after Breaking Bad, and I think he was promoting like a not so great show he was doing on NBC or ABC afterwards. I forget what it was, but it wasn't a great show. But I still was like, oh my God, that's Gus from fucking Breaking Bad.
He lives here in Austin.
Does he? He's so great.
I've seen him at the YMCA working out. I've worked out in the same room as Gus.
I did kind of, when you have those, like, when you do late night, there's 3, like 3 guests or 2 or 3 guests in every night of, somebody famous. And so you get a little numb to it, but then you find out who your like showbiz crushes are,
My favorite was Serena Williams. Came in once, and like, just watching her during the interview, I'm like, this is the most muscular human being I think I've ever seen in my life. Like, bodybuilder sized legs, just an amazing, looking at going, how do you ever get to that point, where you're born with that kind of physical advantage? And that's
well, I've always been fascinated by athletes who are able to, like, don't really need to practice as much anymore. You know what I mean? Like once they're playing in regular season and stuff like that, they still practice, but like it's different, you know, like they're just so good.
Yeah, that was the fun part of working at Best Damn. Like I got to meet all of the guys I'd grown up watching. And one point we did a show of the best college running backs ever. So it
Wow.
was Herschel Walker, Bo Jackson, Archie Griffin, and Billy Sims from Oklahoma. And I'm going out and for some reason I was producing that segment, and I brought him in at some point. I'm standing there, and like Bo Jackson and Herschel Walker are almost my height. They're not tall.
Yeah.
I'm like, these are two of the greatest athletes on the entire planet ever. And we're just standing there together. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I'm just like you guys. I'm just
That's
like
awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. When I'm trying to think when I did Superman show. Yeah. Right around that time, I also was doing the roast. I did about eight or nine Comedy Central roasts. And it was like that when I met like Mike Tyson. Like he was in one of the roasts, and yeah, and I remember like crazy Mike Tyson, not like this is like lovable, like he's high Mike Tyson, you know what I mean? But I remember like before he had the tattoo, he was a lot scarier, you know?
Right. Yeah. It's like, hey, you've got makeup on your face. I don't care. You can call it a tattoo now, but clowns wear makeup on their face.
Yeah, but it is cool. Like, you know, athletes are like that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, it is. And they always, you know, they wanted to, I have so many stories from Best Damn, but it was always super fun to see these guys come in. And half the time, well, maybe a quarter of the time, they'd want to be in a sketch with us because they want to practice acting or whatever. And so that'd be kind of fun, sort of throwing those guys into sketches and trying to work with them. So then you went to Arsenio. Peter Charkalis was there, right?
Yeah. Was he a Kilborn guy?
He was, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I love Pete. Yeah, Pete was great. Pete was really great joke writer and stuff. Yeah, so I was the head writer over there, and that was syndicated. So I always remember the schedule being like rough because we didn't have a lot of weeks off. Like it's not like in a regular late night show you work all year, but every like 6-7 weeks you have the week off. And this, you know, you go 10-12 weeks straight, and then you're done in, you know, end of May or something like that, or June. But yeah, I did that. That was, you know, that was fun. That was the first late night show to be launched in syndication since the first Arsenio show. So it was kind of a big deal at the time.
And what was your job on that show? Were you EP on that show? Or?
No, I was just head writer. I was the head writer. So that was, you know, and that like pretty much at that point, all of the network shows had gone to pretty much 4 days a week schedule, you know, 4 shows a week. And so this was 5. So that, you know.
Yeah, that 5th day makes a difference.
It does. It does. There probably were other shows that had 5 probably, but there were a bunch that didn't, like. So yeah, that was a hard, like, it was a lot of work, but it was fun. And like, again, we had, you know, we'd have some really cool guests, and like late night is very fun because you just, you know, you come in and you hope you've got something that, you know, you got to have enough when you leave the night before that you're not starting at absolute zero the next day. Because we had a pretty small staff. But it's, you know, it's a lot of like, the show all came together there by like, you know, noon. You know, we do our like 11 o'clock briefing with Arsenio, and at the end of that meeting, we kind of knew what the show was, you know.
Yeah, that was a fun show. I always liked Arsenio.
He's great.
Likability. I mean, he's not my favorite comic on the planet, but he's just a nice, likable character.
He's a terrific guy. He's funny. He's a real fun hang, and you know, I used to really enjoy the stories. I mean, he had so many amazing fucking stories from, you know, he was the biggest thing in the world at 1989, you know. Yeah. It was such a big thing, and he had so many great stories from that time. So every now and then you get in a storytelling mood, and I just would always be so much fun.
That's awesome. Yeah. So then you went to you did a bunch of roasts, right? Called Comedy
Yep.
Central roast.
I did a bunch of them, and I was kind of like doing like pretty much every every 6 months or something like that on them. But then when I started to do those late night shows, I kind of got out of the rotation, and I went back in after. I'm trying to think, was it Arsenio? I did the roast of Charlie Sheen, and then I did Arsenio, and then when I was done with that, I did the Comedy Central roast of Justin Bieber, and that was the last one I did.
Well, and that's like the burn. It was essentially just roast, right?
Yep. The burn I did before. The burn I think I did between. Yeah, the burn I did before the Justin Bieber one. It was when they were. It was when they were roasting Roseanne. So I did not do that one because I was working on the burn with Jeff Ross, which was 2013. That was a lot of fun because that show was just, we had a lot of really strong writers. It was hard jokes. It was roasting the week. It was a really good. Mike Gibbons ran that. I was the head writer, and it was really, really fun. It was just, here's what's happening this week, or here's what's going to happen next week, and Jeff at a monitor roasting, clips and things like that, and then bringing on comedians to roast like the big topics of the week for a couple of acts. And, these were really, really fun shows. And so in addition to just like making fun of, people in the news, they'd roast each other and stuff like that. It was a super fun show.
Yeah, hardcore jokes. That was a joke writer's show right there. And I'd talked to Gibbons a little bit about, I don't remember what I was doing at the time, about maybe working there, because he knows I like to write kind of hard punch.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, you'd be good for this." And I'm
like,
that looks like fun.
They were hard jokes. It was always like, it's definitely harder jokes than like network late night. That's a very different animal.
Yeah, and you guys, you had a bit on there, something about death, like the celebrity death of the week, like you.
Oh, we did, yeah. That the last act was called Too Soon, and he would roast somebody that just died, and it sounds worse. That sounds meaner than it is, but it would be kind of like it was. I'm trying to remember who it was. It was like Sally Ride, Neil. We had two astronauts, Sally Ride, Neil Armstrong. Trying to think of but they were it had to be somebody significant. And then it would be basically just like, we'd write, 100 jokes, and then he'd pick like, Jeff would pick his favorite, like 8,
right.
And then kind of put it in, and we'd put some, some sad music underneath it. And
I thought it was hilarious.
It always worked. Yeah. It always worked. It was a really fun idea. It was really fun. And so it was like a little bit of a send off. And I never thought it was mean, but it was definitely like, it was roasty. Yeah.
It's one of those things, like I've noticed that people need distance, right? They don't handle comedy well when it's too close to death, no matter who it is. I remember when Gandolfini died, like I had a couple of jokes, and I think I've even posted one somewhere, something about like only 7 years, like died after only 7 years after his career.
Right.
Like that. And so
like too soon.
Really, really upset. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not anymore.
Well, that's why when you're going to do a mean joke, you got to put a lampshade on it. So like, if that segment was called Too Soon, literally right. He'd say, so-and-so passed away. Is this the time to eulogize in it? Or is it too soon to do this? Like whatever that intro was. And I think if you put a lampshade on it, you call it Too Soon. It's like, look, you stayed around. You could have changed the channel. You know what I mean? And I think that's the reason why the roasts haven't gotten canceled, because that's what they are. You know what I mean?
You're not, nobody should be surprised at what they're hearing.
No. And, and it's all that was one of the things I learned from Jeff Ross that was really good about roasting, is he had a philosophy about it, which was, a roast is a social contract, right? So like, you and I are doing it. We agree to do this. I'm going to tell some jokes about you at your expense. And I know you're going to get up and do the same thing about me. And I'm going to try to make you laugh. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to try to hurt your feelings.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I'm going to make fun of you, you know? And so that social contract, I think, allows for, you know, the important thing during roast, which is the most important thing during roast is not even the joke. It's the cutaway to the person after the joke, laughing at the joke.
Yeah.
You know, like and then when you watch somebody being such a good sport, even though you and I know in television, those shots can be stolen. But like my favorite, when I did the Justin Bieber one, the guy who was having the most fun was Shaq. Shaq loved it. He thought it was so funny. He thought everything was funny. And he thought it was even funnier when they were talking about him. He was literally like shaking and, you know, crying. And you probably met, I don't know if you met him on Best Damn, but like his hands are so big. He's holding a cocktail napkin and it looks like a stamp. And he's just like sweating and he's crying and he's wiping his eyes. And like, that's the fun of it. So like that guy showed up knew he was going to take it and like loved it, just loved it. And that to me is like that's why you do a roast. You can't, you know, people were awful to Martha Stewart and she just like smiled and looked cute after all the jokes, you know?
Yeah. I mean, once you're at the level where you're going to get roasted, you should be, you've been around Hollywood long enough. You've done enough where you're kind of immune, you know, like you got so much armor for what this is and so much ability to go ahead and act anyway. It's pretty crazy.
Well, there are people that though, I think that like have, you know, who's been surrounded by people telling them that their shit doesn't stink forever because they can't take it.
Right.
You know, I didn't like Ludacris was on that roast and I liked him. He was very nice when I met him. He just didn't know what he was walking into and didn't seem very down with it.
Oh, it's funny. All right, man. Talk about Snoop Dogg. Talk about that Martha Stewart Snoop Dogg show.
Yeah, I did a show. I got a call to meet on a show, which they were like, it's something with Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg. And so I it didn't seem as weird to me because I had seen them on the roast together and stuff like that. So I was like, I knew that I'm like, oh yeah, that's an odd couple, but like it's not like they don't know. I knew they really knew each other. So
well, and he'd moved up into Hollywood. He'd done a ton of stuff. So yeah.
At that point, he was far outside of the, you know, outsider hip hop guy. You know what I mean? Like he's still putting out music and he still produces music and stuff, but he was far outside of like, you know, that 90s Snoop. He was, you know, he was a different guy. It was a long time ago. So I went in to meet and they're like, well, this is going to be a cooking show with, it's going to be a talk show, but it's going to have a big food component with Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, I get the Martha of it. And they're like, no, Snoop, like, he's like a cook. He's not, you know, Martha, but like he knows how to cook and he loves food and all this other stuff. And they kind of had an idea for a format. And they were looking for somebody who came from the late night kind of comedy talk world. And so I kind of was a little bit of a unicorn because I happen to know a lot about food. Like, you know, my wife wrote a book on entertaining. We traveled a lot. I know, you know, I cook a lot, the whole thing. So like I was pretty sure that like, if Martha said something, like if I didn't know what it was with regard to food, I could figure it out in like 10 minutes, you know? So they hired me to do that show. And, you know, I started with, you know, they kind of had a format. And so we didn't have very much time. We had about 7 weeks to staff it up and shoot it. And, at the end of the 7 weeks, we had it in the can, and then I didn't. Someone else did post-production on it, but yeah, that was it. I got that sucker going. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed both of those folks a lot, and I think what, you know, again, when you're like with the cards, you know what I mean? Like, you know, Martha Stewart has her cards and Snoop Dogg has his cards, and so you always kind of try to do that because, you know, they weren't in the office every day, so it isn't the type of thing like you could we didn't have a ton of access to ask them a million questions. Their time was very valuable. So we're really kind of figuring out as we went along.
Right. That's cool. And so after that, you went to the Soup again, or you were at the Soup?
No. I just did my last gig was I did Martha and Snoop. We did about 40 episodes of that, and a lot of fun, really great, crazy show. And then I did it was 2019. We did our last episode, or the last episode so far of that. And then I went and did a little development for Jimmy Fallon's production company. They have a show that that's based on his like musical games. So I went and kind of worked on that for a while, and then I got the job on a reboot of The Soup.
Okay.
Which ran through on and off through the pandemic. It kind of happened just before the pandemic, and then the pandemic, and then we kind of ran through it.
Yeah, that pandemic thing kind of hit like a meteor in Hollywood, right?
It did. I bet you would have liked it on some level in terms of the writer's room thing, because it changed. And, there are things about it that no one knew how to, like, what to do, because it's just, no one had ever thought, well, the writers are all going to be in their houses. Like, right. People were terrified of that. Before a pandemic, people would be like, what are you talking about? They're not going to do anything. You know what I mean? Like, what if they just decided not do, like, people would be terrified of that idea. And
that's what professional writers are going to do. They're just not going to do the job.
Yeah, I know, right? I know.
But they won't fire me.
It's so crazy, but no, it was actually really good. And I think it was good for writers that show was basically clips and jokes. So we would get like the clips from research in the morning. And then I just say, okay, they're coming in at 8:00. Watch them whenever you want. I'll do our first meeting at 9:30, and then we talk about each of the clips and angles, which ones we liked. And then I put together assignments and I'd send everybody away, and it was all like Google Docs. And then we would get together to review material on most days, but some days, like Wednesday was a slow day. I would be like, turn in material, when you're done, just like have a nice day, so that was nice, because everybody works at a different pace. Some people like air in their day, writers to kind of, mull things over. And there are other people who are just like, they're monster joke machines, and if I'm like, it was great for people that could like crank it out. And then you're like, oh, I have like hours where I'm not sitting at a desk pretending to do something,
Yeah, I remember that was, I used to call Oshak the Unijoker, because he would put a hoodie on and headphones and just hours. And I would walk. I'm a churn and burn. Like, as soon as I get the assignment, I've got the best energy I'm going to have. So I just sit and just write, do a few edits, and then the battery's out. So I used to always just go and sit in his room and just sit there and be like, what are you working on now, man? Like, what's the angle?
He's just a hard worker. He still is,
Oh yeah.
He's like an insanely hard worker. Not that, by the way, not that you weren't, or people who do that, there are people who just like, some of the funniest people I know are like, the battery is out in 60, 90 minutes or something. And then they need to recharge, and they're super, super funny people who just like, almost wind down, and then there are other people that just like, I don't know. I wouldn't call him a craftsman. I don't know what it is he is. I just know he works really hard,
He does. Yeah. I'll give Bob he is obsessed.
And he's very funny.
About the
joke. Of course, very funny. Yeah.
Yeah. He's great. Well, cool, man. I don't want to take too much of your time. It's been a retrospective through the Chris McGuire career.
Yeah. It was a nice catch up. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool stuff, man. You've you've hit some fun shows.
It's been fun. It's like, there's always some that are more fun than others and all that, but I do like working, and at the end of the day, it's fun to put on a show. And I think, I always like that about
Right.
it. Like, oh, we're putting on a show. And even though, you start as a performer or something, there's something super satisfying about like, finishing a show. It's cool.
Well, I think it's sort of, to me, it's always been it's like when you're playing chess. As a performer, you get these 2 or 3 pieces. But once you're doing a whole show, it's like, oh, look at all the pieces. Look at all the different things we can do here. And it's just different types of creativity, that you kind of move around through. Like I was talking joke writing battery, I can only write jokes for, like an hour and a half, whatever, 2 hours. But I can go do other creative stuff. I can do sketch or directing or group writing, and my battery recharges over there.
Absolutely.
Just,
Absolutely.
And that's the cool thing about being around a full creative team, that there's always different shit going on, and you can move through.
That's what was bad about working on Zoom, was not being in, just having that on Zoom look, I could have kept everybody on Zoom all day if I wanted to. I just don't want to do that. Everybody's an adult and stuff like that. I know some shows ran it like that, where they literally had.
Oh, that'd be awful.
Yeah, that sounded pretty bad to me, and I just didn't want to do that. I didn't think it would I would get the best out of everybody, and I kind of found a way where I got the best out of everybody. I was like, look, as long as we're all going to be like grown-ups and turn in the shit and have it be good, then let's just try this. And it ended up working,
Yeah, I totally see why that would work, especially with writers, especially with pro writers. It's like, I got to get these in, and I got to make sure I get enough on the show to keep my job. So I got it. This is cool.
Exactly.
Well, cool, man. Again, appreciate it very much. Super fun to talk.
It was a great catch up.
Like anything you want to pitch, or you pitch shows? What do you on the road?
If anybody has any ideas, give them my email. I'm always looking for something to pitch. Yeah. At this point, that's like kind of the business I'm in right now, which is just trying to sell some shows. So I always have a few things like going, but it's not the easiest. There's a lot of people out there all working in the same. It's kind of like late night in some ways, but you have this whole world of people coming up, trying to come up with ideas for shows. And, I met with a lot of production companies like recently, and the last thing is always like, if you have any ideas, feel free to give us a call. Yeah, everybody's tired, man. It's like,
Yeah. Well, like the cool thing about entertainment I always liked was at least you're pitching stuff that you would have fun with. Like typically these are ideas you like.
Oh God, hopefully. Can you imagine having to coming up with an idea for something you really don't want to do, and now you have to do it?
Well, the marketing agency I started here in Austin, a lot of it's that, like, companies come in and it's like, we need this, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I know how to do that, but man, this is not like I'm working with an ammo company, an ammunition supply company right now, and I'm like, I got it. I make your shit look good, but it's come on. Why would I ever want to write about 9mm shells? I don't
Some people are into it.
Way into it.
Yeah.
All right, man. Super fun catching up.
Everybody,
this has been Chris McGuire. Thanks for coming to the Rhetoric Warriors podcast. Get out there and persuade people because they need it.